I'm Dr. Jean Sherman, founder and director of the Sherman Centre for Culture and Ideas, otherwise known as SCCI. You're about to watch a SCCI Virtual Fashion Hub 2020 episode. Thank you for joining us. Over recent months, SCCI has captured the expertise of designers, makers, writers, historians, artists, curators, museum leaders, philanthropists, politicians, and change makers. We will continue sharing their comprehensive and diverse expertise. As we move forward together, SCCI is proud to bring you these leading voices in contemporary culture during this time of uncertainty and opportunity for change.
Good evening, Australia. Tonight, I want to talk to you about the global coronavirus.
Сейчас крайне важно предотвратить угрозу быстрого распространения.
What do you want New Zealanders to do to unite against COVID? Firstly, I do want to acknowledge just how extraordinary this time is.
I want to speak with you about our nation's
I'm speaking to you of what I know is an increasingly challenging time. A time of disruption in the life of our country.
Today, the world.
A disruption that has brought
I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I'd like to thank Dr. Jean Sherman and her team, as well as warmly welcome our guests, Barbara Moore, CEO of the Biennale of Sydney, and Philippe Platel, Cultural Attaché of the Embassy of France and Artistic Director of the French Film Festival in Australia. I'd like to start with a quote from Brooke Andrew, the Artistic Director of NIRIN, the 22nd Biennale of Sydney. The urgent states of our contemporary lives are laden with unresolved past anxieties and hidden layers of the supernatural. NIRIN is about to expose this, demonstrating that artists and creatives have the power to resolve, heal, dismember, and imagine futures of transformation for resetting the world. I hope that NIRIN gathers life forces of integrity to push through often impenetrable confusion. Optimism from chaos drives artists in NIRIN to resolve the often hidden or ignored urgency surrounding contemporary life. Brooke posits that artists play a critical role in creating spaces to talk about the important issues that we're facing today globally. In hindsight, Brooke's vision for the Biennale presents itself as both timely and prescient, not only because of the current circumstances, but also the devastating bushfires that ravaged Australia over summer. And Brooke goes on to say that NIRIN, translated from the Wiradjuri language as edge, is a place from which to see the world through different eyes. So, Barb, as a warm-up, I'm going to start with the big question with you. Could the shifts in our way of life that have been introduced as part of a fight against COVID-19 pave the way for a resetting of the world? And are artists and creatives, as Brooke argues, central to helping us imagine and understand what this might be?
Thank you for asking that question, and thanks for starting with that quote from Brooke, because I've been thinking about that quite a bit in recent days. I read it yesterday again, and that touching on that point of anxieties and things, there are words in there that really resonate with all of us when we're thinking through COVID and how that affects us on a really personal level. I do definitely think that the initial concept of being artist-led and First Nations-led for this exhibition are a way forward for us in reimagining a future where we work much more collaboratively together and probably at a different pace where we're recalibrating our value system. I definitely think that that's at the core of how we need to reimagine how we're living post-COVID.
On a practical level, I mean, the Biennale closed down, only after 10 days of being open. Tim Reeve, the Deputy Director of the Victoria and Albert Museum, said that closing the museum was like putting it into a kind of induced coma, but the toilets still needed to be flushed and the taps turned on to keep the arteries clear and Legionella compliant. What sort of considerations did you have to take into account when closing the Biennale? And can you talk us through a little bit about the process?
Well, look, we were opening the Biennale of Sydney. A Biennale once every 2 years. It has a big momentum just to get to the opening day. So COVID was really only hitting Australia or making international news during our opening week program. So the concept, the idea of having to close the Biennale only became prevalent when we opened our doors. We hadn't conceived it being a possibility until we were actually in the middle of our vernissage program. So very quickly, we had to wrap our heads around closing. And it's not just a museum, it's across 6 sites with the huge public program as well. So it was coming to terms with, what are we doing digitally? How can we support artists during this period when the physical exhibition can't be experienced? And we didn't know if it would ever be experienced past those 10 days. And every day that we were in that 10-day period was a hint of, are we going to close tomorrow? Will we close the next day? And we were just holding on. You know, our volunteers were very low. We were reimagining people's positions just to be able to welcome the public who were able to get to the exhibition to actually physically get there. It was a very rapid decision-making process with a lot of stakeholder management, but it was a scary thought to have to close this exhibition down, especially since it related so much, it touched so many people on the edges, and this being really First Nations driven, it felt like the last show that should close.
And what about, I mean, obviously a lot of artists had travelled to Sydney to install their works and be present. What was the thinking around what you were going to do there?
Well, we had a First Nations conference, Abaquad, that was being run on the closing week of opening weekend. There were quite a few people from around the world here, not just for that conference, but for all of opening week. There were over 100 participating artists in Sydney until March 14th, 15th. So our first priority was getting those artists home. I mean, international borders were closing while people were in Sydney. So it was not thinking through what are we going to do to close the exhibition. It was actually for the safety of the artists who we invited here and making sure that they were safe.
And Philippe, similarly for you, I mean, at what point did you decide to cancel the French Film Festival? And like Barbara, it was across Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra, Perth, Byron Bay and Adelaide.
And it was the same timing because we opened the French Film Festival at the same time as the Biennale, actually the same week. And so we were facing this situation exactly at the same time, and there was no day similar to the previous one. Every day we thought that we would go on. At first we thought that we could only reduce the number of people gathered in the same theater, in the same cinema. And then the decision was made to totally shut down, to postpone the festival, not to close. Because unlike an exhibition, a film festival can open more easily because we just can keep the films and then as soon as it is possible, we can reopen.
And NIRIN has very strong themes around decolonisation, memory and environment. Did the festival have a particular theme, or did you notice that there were particular themes and topics that were being addressed in the films that you had chosen?
There's not a theme every year because our priority is to show the most important films that were produced over a year. But of course, there are some themes which emerge at the end of the day. And quite interestingly, there was this theme which reverberated with what Barbara said about mutual assistance and collaboration.
C'est 8h, pas 7h55, je sais pas pourquoi vous êtes en train de chouiner là. Vous entrez, vous sortez vos cartes du centre.
C'est son pseudonyme, la chicheline. Brigitte Bardot. Brigitte Bardot.
Je te prends rendez-vous aux affaires sociales, t'es d'accord avec ça?
Ah ouais, allez.
Vous les chouchoutez trop et c'est pour ça qu'elles reviennent chez vous. Seulement 4% sont arrivés à se réinsérer. On ne peut pas continuer à dépenser sans résultat, on ne peut plus.
Qu'est-ce que c'est que ça? On répare.
Chantal, elle sait réparer des trucs. Ça se trouve, les autres aussi, elles savent faire des choses. C'est peut-être comme ça qu'on peut les aider.
Moi, j'étais soignante. J'ai travaillé dans une agence immobilière.
T'as fait ça pendant combien de temps?
Un jour. C'est 24 heures, hein. En même temps, c'est beaucoup. On va vous confronter au monde du travail. J'ai 56 ans, je m'appelle les Didi.
Non, tu t'appelles pas les Didi. Est-ce que t'es les Didi?
Non.
Il faut que tu donnes ton vrai nom.
Je répare de l'électroménager. Je l'ai appris en prison. Parce que j'ai tué mon mari.
Attends, Chantal.
J'aime pas mentir.
Oui, mais tu mens.
Audrey, elle dit pas qu'elle a un problème avec les hommes.
Non, attends, moi j'ai aucun problème avec les hommes.
Voilà, Audrey, là, elle ment. Et c'est pas grave. Je vais rapporter des luminaires de chez moi.
Comment veux-tu qu'elle soit autonome si tu mâches tout pour elle? T'as pas vu dans leur regard? l'espoir qui est revenu. Je sais pas comment elles sont belles, comment elles ont envie maintenant.
Barbara, you mentioned it briefly around the digital space, and the word of the moment is pivot, defined as a swift and strategic turn on the spot. And cultural organisations across the world in a very short space of time had to go virtual in response to COVID. When we spoke, Barb, you said that you wanted to, in going digital, you wanted to avoid memorialising the exhibition in the virtual realm. What do you mean by that, and how did it inform your approach?
Again, being artist-led and First Nations-led, before we just flipped to digital and did what people probably expected us to do, which was throw the exhibition online in some kind of a 360-degree walkthrough. It felt like that was a very kind of Western version of experiencing an exhibition. So instead, we were speaking with artists to find out what we can do to best support them. And in NIRIN, there were 38 artists invited to participate as part of the NIRIN WIR program, which is not the physical exhibition as like a, an installation or a sculptural piece or something that you can physically experience, but much more emotive. So Breaking Bread, for example, where their work, you would never actually physically see that or experience it. It was something behind the scenes, and it was so much about bringing people together and literally breaking bread together and learning together and, just healing together, really. So when we went digital, it was a conscious choice to make it social and for people to be invited to experience contemporary art in a very different way than a simulated experience of an exhibition.
And Philippe, I mean, I've been very impressed around how many of the cultural institutions worldwide responded so quickly and so proactively in the digital space. My question is, if it was possible to reconfigure their delivery to be innovative, accessible, and relevant online in a matter of weeks, why did it take a pandemic to do this?
But there was a good response from the institutions, but what is even more striking is that the response from the audience is massive, has been massive. The visitation of museum websites worldwide increased by 200%. There is a statistics in France saying that for internet users, for 53% of them, culture was the most essential activity they had during the confinement, and online, of course. So there is obviously an appetite for digital contents that now we have to take into account, and undeniably it will be a key to make people reconnect with culture and their cultural institutions. It's obvious.
But am I right in thinking that the festival chose not to go online?
No, we went online, but a bit later. But we went online, and now we have 4 films screened. We propose 4 films in partnership with SBS. It's not that the French Film Festival, this edition of the festival is online, is that we propose a curated selection of 4 films every weekend, which are available on SBS.
But for you personally, I know that going to the cinema is about a physical shared experience, about sharing empathy and strong emotion. Are you worried that we're going to lose that engagement, that emotional contagion that we have when we connect and share an experience?
Yeah, it's a concern shared by everyone, including the directors of these big festivals like Cannes, for instance. For a long, long time, the management of the Cannes Festival always said that they would never work with platforms because it was not consistent with their philosophy about going to cinema and share emotions together, etc. There's going to be a digital, an online version of Cannes and an online festival, a global online film festival.
Now, the COVID-19 pandemic might have closed cinemas, but movie lovers still have something to look forward to. The We Are One Virtual Film Festival happens next month.
More than 20 film festivals around the world are teaming up for a 10-day-long streaming event on YouTube. The We Are One Global Film Festival will let people watch movies for free, with cinemas shut down across the globe and major showcases like the Cannes and Tribeca Film Festivals canceled. The organizers, Tribeca Enterprises and YouTube, said on Monday that We Are One will showcase films and documentaries, as well as music, comedy, and conversations. But no programming details have been announced, and it is unlikely that major movies that generally launch at film festivals will be included. The cancellation of traditional film festivals has robbed filmmakers and movie studios of crucial opportunities to promote their films to the media and the public. However, festival participants like Tribeca Film Festival co-founder Jane Rosenthal have praised the new streaming event, saying the idea is to inspire and unite people across borders. And while the festival will be streamed for free, viewers will be asked to donate to the World Health Organization's Crisis Relief Fund.
I think people will have the choice, and they have the choice between staying at home and watching a film or going to cinema, and those two experiences are totally different. And it's not because people will watch films at home that they won't go to cinema for some other films, maybe. It will be a dialogue between the two options.
Physical and the virtual.
Physical or virtual. And it's also the case for... It can be complementary as well.
Barb, on that point, I mean, that physical and virtual, what about the impact of social distancing? I mean, when audiences are finally ready to venture out, and we can imagine, people are going to be hungering for all forms of live music, exhibitions and theatre. Do you think there will be a shift in public attitudes? Are you anticipating that the public will be cautious about attending public spaces and gatherings for some time to come? And how are you going to address this? How will you reassure your audiences?
I definitely think some people are going to be more cautious than others in running out and going anywhere other than their house or their home, because not that long ago we were conditioned to totally quarantine and self-isolate. I mean, how long we take to reemerge from this will be a personal decision. I don't know the merit of this, but I heard that generally there was, it took some people 3 years to kind of get over the Spanish flu. And I think there's some merit in that for us to learn from with this. But look, in terms of support to provide people a comfort on what we're doing, of course, we're taking so many measures to, do extra cleaning and removing any soft surfaces, removing headphones for work that you would have experienced that way. I mean, things that just are pretty easy to do, actually, but reduce those touch points of possible transmission. Another note for those people, I do think that when these museums open, there will be a flux of digital thirst. People who won't want to jump out right away to see it, but want to engage with that content again, so are looking for it online. And the digital content will need to resume, no matter what kind of a physical experience festivals, museums, or anything else are offering. Digital is another way to access that for people who can't physically get there.
What does this say then about how we measure success? Because, I mean, traditionally, audience or success for cultural institutions is measured by attendance or box office success. In a recent interview, the ABC TV News Arts show The Mix, Paul Fletcher said that artists and their managers had to work harder to build a narrative around their work to connect it with the community that funds it. But if you can no longer measure success by attendance, then what's the narrative? How do we quantify the value of the arts?
I don't think it's that we don't measure it by attendance numbers. I think we recalibrate what those attendance numbers are. We're not going to be achieving the same attendance numbers as we were previously, and digital will need to play a big part in what that kind of KPI is for how well we're doing. Taking out a quantitative part of the equation, I think, is absolutely impossible, really. It is one of the measures. But I do think we're all still grappling with that social impact question, and we don't know how to measure that. I have to say, personally, what drives me, and I think it's something that's really important for arts organizations to continue to report on and emphasize the relevance of, is just providing the opportunity for people to feel and experience something that might shift something inside of them. I mean, that kind of a soft raison d'être is so critical for our programming of what the reason is behind what we're doing. That needs to play an equal relevance to physical attendance or reach or click-through or...
I mean, the digital numbers will be taken into account more than before. Now, the visitation of the Louvre on their website is 10 million. It was 10 million people visited their website over 70 days, while usually they have 14 million people visiting their website over a year. So these numbers will be valued as much as the physical numbers, I'm assuming.
In this strange and new socially distanced Europe, cultural landmarks have become off limits. Museums, galleries, theatres and concert halls all closed, and would-be audiences told to stay home. But in this time of coronavirus confinement, many leading voices in the arts are saying that it's now more important than ever for people's creative spirits to be lifted.
It is absolutely vital that we still have easy access to culture, that we have the means to engage with history, with the cultures of the past, the cultures of the present, and explore over the last, if you talk about the British Museum, how people over the last 2 million years have tackled big challenges, health challenges and other challenges, and come out on top of it.
Well, normally this area would be packed with groups of tourists and school children and other visitors wanting to get inside to the museum behind me. And as you can see, the doors now are all shut. But that doesn't mean that tour guides here and right across Europe aren't coming up with creative new ways of letting people inside despite the lockdowns. This museum in Stockholm has started what it calls a sofa tours program, allowing visitors to explore exhibitions through a live stream straight to their living room.
This was actually my first ever online guided tour, and I think I never had so many people daring to ask those questions. And there are so many questions coming in, and people are so thankful for having something new to enter the monotony of everyday life.
Many cultural institutions are following this lead and increasing their online offerings to help people through self-isolation, giving a new way to pass the time and taking a bit of art safely.
So what does that say then about the future of, for example, Biennales or blockbuster exhibitions? I mean, Tony Elwood, director of the National Gallery of Victoria, said in a recent article that he remained committed to major draw cards. So, Philippe...
The thing is that it's part of a business model shared by all the museums in the world. Of course, it will urge us to rethink the model and reshuffle the model a bit, but we will still need these momentum, these big blockbusters, financially. And I think it will be easier for for museums and for the performing art, for instance, to adjust a bit. For instance, if you can't host the same number of people on one day, maybe the length of an exhibition can be extended a bit. The thing about the blockbusters is also the cost incurred and even the environmental cost incurred. And this will have to be addressed. And this is a question that was asked for a long time. How can we make blockbusters more environmentally friendly? We've heard a lot of museums saying that they will focus on more local collections and they will show their own collections, or let's say even European collections in Europe, American collections in the States. Probably easier for a European or an American museum to say that, but for instance here in Australia, you will need works coming from overseas if you want to have big blockbusters as they've been defined so far.
On that point around business models, relying on a diversified spectrum of income sources can make museums and galleries and cultural organisations much more agile and resilient. However, private income sources are more susceptible to market change, and those organisations relying mostly on private funding have shown greater vulnerability in the past weeks. For example, Sydney's Carriage Works. Is this an opportunity, Barb, to rethink the business model, and how do you make an organisation fit for crisis?
Planning? No, but I do. It's important to acknowledge that the push for arts organizations to diversify their income streams, meaning looking at multiple sources, has actually, in this environment, made us more vulnerable. Because we're not relying so much on that government funding, it means that the moment that something hits the world economically, those alternative sources dry up very quickly. So absolutely, we have to be looking at business models very differently, and we need to do it quite quickly. But I'd argue that a lot of us were in that position of having to do that anyway, where we have to be working more collaboratively together. It has to be less about ownership. That idea about environment and thinking through what our impact is was critical before COVID hit. So if anything, this just accentuates those things that were really important already, and we were realizing increasingly we're needing more focus.
But what then is the role of government here, which you've just sort of alluded to? I mean, composer and broadcaster Andrew Ford, in an article he wrote for Inside Story, asks, why has Australia been so much less generous to lock down artists than Britain or Germany? Does it simply come down to a lack of political will? Or is it, as Benjamin Law wrote in The Guardian, conservative antipathy to arts funding, the enduring belief that artists are not really deserving and that culture is not a real industry? Is it a simpler explanation that our cultural expectations have always suffered from poverty of imagination?
Poverty of imagination. I feel like I'm led in the answer to that question, but I will say I think this is a real shift for all of us to come to terms with, and it demands for leaders in this space to come through with really creative solutions that aren't looking to government for a handout necessarily, aren't looking to artists to produce more work with less money. It really is a complete recalibration of what we're doing and how much we're expecting to get out of that. I don't look at our government, and expect more money to come out of it necessarily for this period, because I'm not in the performing arts. I'm not, an expert in those areas other than my zone. People who are in leadership roles need to speak quite transparently about the positions that they're in and how we might be able to help each other out in each industry to adapt and grow out of this. Not everything will survive out of a trauma. We know that. And the question is, culturally, what as a population that want to rise to the surface, and what needs to be recalibrated and linked much more closely together.
Philippe, further to that, I mean, how important is the dissenting voice in art? The playwright David Land says that dissent is necessary to democracy. How important is it to preserve sites such as the Biennale or the film festivals, because those artists and creatives give voice to dissent that may be at odds with government, but they are another voice in the democratic system. So how important is it for us to keep preserving those?
The museum world has been transformed enormously over the few 10 or 20 years. And now a museum is not only a place where you collect works, it's also a place to live in, it's a place to gather, it's a place where you can listen to people talking, and it's a place for ideas. The cultural venues are much more than only cultural venues, actually. There are places where people can also share about their concerns and maybe understand their world a bit more. And I don't know any other place, actually, in a society where you can say, well, I think I will understand my world better. Is there another place? Not an airport, not a mall, definitely not. There are only the cultural venues where you can say, I will feel better, I will feel like a better human being, and I will understand my world better.
I mean, during lockdown, as we've seen, people have been reading, watching Netflix, listening to podcasts, singing from their balconies. They're making culture. So is part of what we're talking about here is that people want to live a more creative way of life.
Einstein said that creativity was contagious. So it's probably the good word now. We might also have this romantic impression that artists will be much inspired by this crisis, and I talked to a few of them, to artists who actually were invited by the Biennale, And actually, they struggled as everyone. For instance, for those who have kids and families, it was very difficult to practice. And the practice is now more and more complex, and it's not only painting or drawing at home. And for those who had big shootings on the other side of the world, they couldn't do it, so they had to adapt or to find new ways. People like us felt more creative. But the artists, they just had to move on. But it was not that easy. And one of them told me that he felt anesthetized during that period. And I don't have the feeling that feeling anesthetized is a good driver when you want to create.
I wanted to ask sort of one last question, which is I know that you're thinking about proceeding with the festival in August. And Barb, venues are starting to open up very soon. What do you hope for your audiences and from your audiences?
I see NIRIN as being an invitation for people to feel something different, to see the world through somebody else's eyes, to acknowledge that they're not the center of the world, that the periphery is somebody else's center, really. Sometimes when you walk into an exhibition, when you're seeing somebody else's trauma or very raw experience, you're learning something about yourself, deeply about yourself, or maybe somebody else that you hadn't really related to or hadn't thought about. And I think it's important for the works that you don't understand, that don't speak to you right away. Those are generally the works that maybe you should spend a little bit more time with, because perhaps there's something to learn there that isn't automatically apparent. I hope that people really embrace the opportunity to be vulnerable, to feel something, and to do it in a very safe place. The visual arts, if you walk into a gallery and somebody gets too close to you, normally it would feel very weird. You need social distancing to experience contemporary art in any moment, COVID or no COVID. Museums and galleries have an important place to be a sanctuary and a place of calm and quiet and reflection and learning and healing. So I hope it can be those things for people.
Philippe, for you?
Well, I hope that our audience will understand even more the difference between watching a film at home and watching a film in a cinema. After 2 or 3 months, they had no other options than watching a film at home. Most importantly, I hope that they will feel healthy, that they will feel that everything was put in place to ensure that they would watch film in the best and healthiest conditions, and we will make sure of that with Palace Cinemas, our partner. But I know that there is that our audience is very, very impatient to see the festival open, because it closed 1 week after it opened, and sometime in some cities, in Adelaide, for instance, it closed 1 day after it opened, and in Brisbane, it didn't open at all. So there is definitely an impatience among our audience to see the festival reopen, clearly.
My thanks to you both. Thank you.
Thank you, Dolla.